Hi Suzanne, and welcome to this sort of session of trauma talks. I'm so pleased that you are part of this series. So can you just sort of introduce yourself, sort of who you are, where you're from, and the types of people that you work with?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah,
I am. So my name is Suzanne Mailer, and I came from Denmark
nice.
back in the day. I immigrated to the United States in 1992 by myself. Quite
Wow.
a feat when you look
Yeah,
back on it. It was like, wow.
yeah, it's
You know,
amazing on your own.
back then it was just exciting,
Yeah.
Now looking back, I'm like, holy cow. Um, So I've been in the United States for 32 years now,
Wow.
and I love it here. I'm in South Florida, so
Oh,
the land of the tank tops and shorts and t-shirts.
yep.
So
Very
uh,
jealous, but there we go.
yeah, yeah. Um, I am a licensed psychotherapist, specializing in trauma and dissociation,
Okay.
and I've been doing that for the last 16 plus years.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we've kind of known each other for about the last 4 years, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been about 4 years this month, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I've learned so much from you. So, with your background in trauma, can you just sort of explain to the listeners like what is trauma and what we perceive trauma as?
hmm Of course. Trauma to a lot of people are like the big categories only. So people imagine that maybe you had a car accident, perhaps you were assaulted somewhere, um, if you were abused, severely abused as a kid, those types of things are what people typically recognize as trauma.
Okay.
But that's not all. Trauma is a really big umbrella. And sometimes I step away from just using the trauma word
Yeah.
and add dysfunction because pretty much any level of dysfunction is going to impact you, especially if you're a kid.
Mhm.
We don't have a lot of tools as children. So,
Yeah.
um, and there's also a difference from person to person. You can have a household with 5 kids in it, and
Mm.
each child has a different makeup. They have a different personality. They have different levels of resiliency.
Mhm.
They have different temperaments. Um, they're different people.
Yeah.
And even though they grew up in the same house, if you ask them to describe their childhood, you will often get 5 different renditions of what it was like to grow up in that house. And two of the kids might grow up doing fairly well
Mhm.
in life. And then the other three are suffering from depression and all of these other ailments. Um, it's just different for everybody.
Yeah.
So trauma can be growing up with an emotionally unavailable parent. It can be growing up with alcoholism or drug use around you.
Mm.
It can be um, being singled out in school, bullied, or if you're a bit of an introvert going to school, it can be
Yeah.
pretty tough being a kid.
Yeah.
So if you have people that your parents might work a lot, so you have no one to talk to.
Mm.
Um, they're all different things
Yeah,
that
and
can
and
be
there's a lot
perceived.
of that going around, isn't there? People that bullying is getting worse and worse in schools and in workplaces as well. I think it's still
Well, people have less and less, to put it directly, people skills and social skills because
mm,
social media is used so much.
yeah.
Um, when we were kids, we played outside all the time. We didn't have iPads and
Yeah.
games and all of these things. We had to
Yeah.
entertain ourselves.
Yeah.
So, and we had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, I remember playing out till the street lights came on. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it was
And
hours and
your
hours.
parents like dinner,
Yeah.
time to eat. So now children live in a very, very different world.
Yeah.
Uh, and problem solving skills are not learned. Uh, Often proper socialization skills are not learned.
Yeah. Yeah. And when people do sort of experience trauma, what kind of happens to them? What sort of physically and emotionally, what kind of goes on in the body and a bit in the brain as well? What happens to people?
Lots of things happen. And these are things that people don't really know about. Um, of course, it depends on the trauma,
Yeah.
but your nervous system is dysregulated.
Okay.
The way that your brain functions actually changes because trauma memory and quote unquote normal memory are not the same. They're not processed the same. Your brain doesn't handle it the same.
Okay.
Your hormones are actually affected because your nervous system uh, is tied in with that,
Hmm.
and your stress response is up. So your hormones are tinkered with, and that can end up being a lifelong problem.
Yeah.
Your emotional state can obviously be affected. Um, your physical state and your mental state; those are the three big ones.
Yeah.
Um, for some people, it's just their spiritual state, whether they're if they're religious, their
Hmm.
re- religious beliefs can actually be affected.
Hmm.
Of how could this happen, and how could God let this happen to me?
Hmm.
Um, I work a lot with people that have problems with that. They feel like they were abandoned.
Okay.
Disease can manifest itself, like
Hmm.
actual physical ailments. The trauma we experience is stored in our cellular memory. And
Hmm.
that's not just something people are making up. It's scientifically proven
Yeah.
that it is stored in cellular memory. And
Yeah.
if we don't tend to the emotions
Hmm.
that are literally stuck in our physical being,
Hmm.
disease will present itself at some point.
Yeah.
Um, Lots of people have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome,
Yeah.
and that's most of the time because there is emotional stuff going on.
Yeah. And in your when you're sort of speaking to clients, do can you see a change in their sort of behavior?
Yes, obviously, I typically don't know the client ahead of time,
Yeah.
but I they present with the same typical issues.
Okay.
So they have difficulties with relationships. They have difficulties with intimacy and allowing other people to love them.
Hmm.
They have they often become overgivers, so
Hmm.
people pleasers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes people have boundary issues. They either have very, very rigid boundaries with everything and everyone, or
Hmm.
they have like no boundaries at all. And they've become the doormat for everybody else
Okay.
and set themselves up to be further traumatized going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And then something that goes along with trauma is something called being triggered. And it's
Mhm.
something that I sort of talk about in my social media content.
Mhm.
What's your explanation of being triggered? What does that actually mean for people?
Sure. So triggers are words, places, people, things, you name it, smells, sounds,
Hmm.
anything that reminds a person, even just a little bit, um, of something uncomfortable, traumatizing shameful that they experienced at some point in their life. And often this is actually not a conscious thing for
Right.
people.
Okay.
People don't recognize why they're reacting because it's not a response, it's a reaction. They don't understand why they're reacting so strongly to something.
Hmm.
And when someone's reaction to the given situation to the other people around them
Mhm.
appears to be completely out of proportion to what's actually happening, that's
Mhm.
someone being triggered.
Right. But that's manageable. We can learn how to manage those triggers.
Oh, 100%. Once you figure out what your triggers are,
Yeah.
uh, you then can either go back with the help of a professional and take care of the traumatic experiences you've had,
Hmm.
um, and then be very mindful and bring it to the forefront and very conscious
Yeah.
about your reactions so that you can catch and correct in the moment and teach yourself different.
Have to do that. Yeah. Cool. Um, and then sort of moving on. So we've talked about trauma, what trauma is, what is a trigger. Yeah, what is a trigger? How it manifests physically. So what can we then do? So what? So having tools. So it's great that people reach out and speak to a counselor, a therapist. Um, what other things can people do to have in their sort of toolbox? I talk about toolboxes. What sort
Mm-hmm.
of techniques can people learn when they are sort of maybe between sessions with
Mm-hmm.
people?
Sure. Um, Talk therapy is super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, if you find someone that is working with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of tools to teach you. If they don't, move on and find somebody else. Because while there's a lot of value in talk therapy alone, and for some people that's enough, depending on what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
For some people, it's enough to be able to share what they're experiencing and what they experienced and the impact of it, and they can let it go and move on. But for a lot of people, it is not enough. So, in addition to therapy, counseling, um, there are a lot of things you can do to help yourself. You can do meditations that are geared towards specific things, whether you're dealing with anxiety or depression or um, sleep issues. It doesn't matter what it is. You believe me, you can find a meditation for it. Um, Often people will say, "I don't know how to meditate. I can't shut my brain off." Well, the good news is you don't have to.
Yes, that's the misconception with meditation, isn't it? People just seem to, people have this impression that you sit there and you're quiet and you shut your eyes, and it's
I
not
mean, come on. We're not Buddhas, so we can't, or Tibetan monks. I do. We have not practiced that long that we know how to do that.
no, no.
Um, so you can do guided meditations. You can do moving meditation.
Mhm.
When you walk your dog, if you have one,
Mhm.
um, don't plug the ear pods in and get lost in the music. Connect with nature and just pay attention to what your dog is doing.
Yeah.
Um, Working out, and to some people, physical activity seems like a non attainable thing.
Mhm.
Well, if I was not depressed, I would do it, but I'm so depressed I can't get out of bed. But sometimes we need to do certain things that we
Yeah.
don't want to do,
Yeah.
because moving your body and getting the energy body moving is
Yeah.
very, very important.
Yeah.
It stimulates your natural happy juices in your brain.
Mhm.
So that's a good thing to do. You can do breath work is really, really impactful.
Mhm.
Um, Under the meditation, there's something called PMR that stimulates your actual nervous system. It's a systematic tension and releasing of
Okay.
muscle groups one by one, and it's timed and things like that. There are so many things people can do.
Yeah, there's loads. We could talk for hours about
Oh
different
my God,
different sorts
find
of
a group
techniques,
of
could
people,
we?
a support group. There are a lot of things people can do.
Yeah, and I think it's the movement, like you were saying about going to the gym or getting some physical exercise. It's the the motion of moving
Yeah,
then gives you more energy to do it even more, then doesn't it? It's
absolutely. And nobody says you need to go run a marathon. Just go for
no,
a walk.
go for a walk. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. There's no way I could do a marathon. It'd be a nice little walk
I'm
around
not doing a marathon. I like
the...
to run, but not that far. So
No, absolutely. But it is that motion that helps give
yes,
people the energy that then they can go and do more of that sort of stuff, isn't it? So
yeah.
that's amazing. So I have Googled you, obviously, and looked at your website. And on your website, it says that in order to create lasting change and personal and emotional freedom, it's not enough that we do the intellectual conscious work, so that the talking therapy that we've spoken about. It's looking at the programs that are running in the background.
Mhm.
What do you mean by that exactly?
So, first of all, the intellectual part is often the easiest part for people to do. And when people have had trauma, that's their safe space.
Mm,
So they stick in their head, and if I can just figure out the process, what's the next step, I can stay up here
mhm,
and not be in my body, because in my body are my emotions, and I don't want to deal with those.
mhm,
So that's one thing, and that's why people tend to stay and want to just do the intellectual work because that seems
okay.
safer.
Yeah.
Um, I deal a lot with programming. People don't like that term, but I call a spade a spade. So it
Fair enough.
is programming.
Hmm.
Um, the most impactful years of our lives that sort of builds the foundation of us is 0 to 7
Yeah.
in our life as after we're born. Now, problem is we're little sponges in those ages, and literally every experience we have
Hmm.
with anyone has the potential to create programs about who we are, what the world is like, what's safe, what's not safe, how should and shouldn't I be. But we're not really very conscious about those programs.
Hmm.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and if I had a buck for every person that sat on this couch behind me, when people said, I don't have any trauma, what do you mean programming? I live a very conscious life.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, Most people are not aware of the actual programs that are really driving their bus.
Yeah. And so it's important then to tap into those programs.
Oh, yes,
Would
because,
would you say
okay,
that they are beliefs in a way?
would I?
Would you say that they are beliefs that we create when we are
Yes,
between 0 and 7? Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. There are beliefs that we create about us, the world, other people, life.
Yeah. And so when we tap into those, we can really see where it all comes from.
Yes,
Yeah.
because if you grew up in a house where you were shushed whenever you talked, kids weren't allowed to be kids, to give you an example, these children very well will grow up with um, not using their voice, not speaking up for themselves, having a belief that they are to be seen and not heard. And that does not have to be verbalized and actually spoken to them. They still get the message loud and clear.
Yeah.
Um, so those are programs
Yeah.
that they don't have a right to speak up. They don't have a right to take up space. Oh, we can go on and on about these
Yeah.
programs because there are a lot.
Yeah. And so just to sort of finish off a little bit, so if someone is not quite ready to take the step to go and see a counselor or a therapist or a psychotherapist, can you sort of give the listeners maybe 2 or 3 things that they can do now to sort of help them on that sort of journey to booking that call or picking up the phone and making that call? What would you suggest?
Of course. it depends on what they're dealing with, of course.
Yeah.
Um, you can you can go to a retreat. You can find a retreat in your area. Maybe it's a 1 day workshop of some sort that taps a little bit into um, there people do inner child work or just sort of connecting with yourself. Maybe you go on a yoga retreat. Um, those can be great too.
Mhm.
Perhaps download an app. There are free ones with
Yep, loads of them.
breath work and guided meditations, sort of to just begin to reconnect with yourself a little bit.
Okay.
Um, Gosh, there's so many things people can do.
There is, I mean, sort of my go-to ones. There is an app that I sort
Journaling
of,
is another great one.
yeah,
Keep a journal. And no, you don't have to handwrite. I like handwriting because there's a different connection that happens between you and actually putting things on paper.
yeah.
Uh, I give my clients exercises, writing exercises all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
I do as well. It's great. And it's great for
yeah,
them when they come back and they go, oh, yeah, it really made a difference seeing it written down rather than just,
it makes it
typing on
real.
a computer. Yeah, makes it
It
real.
makes it real.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah, go on. There are a lot of things that people.
yeah, absolutely. Um, Thank you so much for being on
Thanks so
this
much.
podcast. I really appreciate it. And I love talking to you. I could talk to you for
Oh,
hours,
my
Suzanne,
pleasure. Yeah,
you
we
know,
could talk for days.
we could, couldn't we? So this will kind of go out sort of in the new year. So really appreciate your time and thank you so much for taking part.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Take care.